It was about 15 years ago when I first realized that I didn't really believe Christianity anymore. And I did spend a little bit of time as an atheist, agnostic, whatever. And I came back, I do practice Christianity now. But I didn't really know at the time, I had never heard a word that would become very common and is now very common. And that word is deconstruction. I didn't really know that what I was going through was a deconstruction. It just felt like a crisis of faith. All I knew was that I was coming up against more and more evidence that the things that I believed and the way I was taught to experience Christianity, to believe Christianity as a kid and through my adult years, and even the way that I was teaching Christianity to other people no longer held water. And I went through what I would describe in Catholic terms, the Catholics have a good word for it, called the dark night of the soul. And I just started to feel like there was nothing I believed in anymore. I just felt this like incredible loss of hope at the time. I mean, I'm super hopeful now, but at the time, it was just the only way that I knew how to understand the world or how to understand meaning. And when you started to strip that away, there was nothing really in its place at that time. Now things look a lot better, but it takes time to get there. And what I realized later is that I was going through something that people now call deconstruction. In this video, I want to give you a couple thoughts on why so many people are deconstructing, specifically within the context of evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. So I'm calling this 4 reasons people are deconstructing Christianity. The word deconstruction is a weird word, and it's actually taken from postmodernist theory, which in itself is probably one of the reasons why evangelicals are so scared of this word, because a lot of fundamentalists are also equally scared of the word postmodernism, but it comes out of theoretical work done by Jacques Derrida, who is a French philosopher. And like the name suggests, deconstruction is ultimately taking things apart. So pulling something apart that has been put together. And for me and for a lot of evangelical fundamentalist kids like me, the deconstruction is fundamentally undoing the way you were taught to have faith, the way you were taught to believe you need to be a Christian. And that deconstruction, I think for some people, maybe some people go looking for it and looking for reasons not to believe. But overwhelmingly, a lot of the people I know get smacked into this process and never wanted it and never asked for it, but come up against a wall of realizing that there are serious problems with the things they've been taught, that there are serious problems with the way that they have been taught to practice, experience, believe faith. And when you come up against those problems, there are people who put their head in the sand and pretend they don't exist or turn to Christian apologetics to try to keep their world small. But there are a lot of people who are honestly just, I think, honest inside and want to actually look and want to actually ask the hard questions, even if those hard questions lead somewhere that they don't like. And I think that's why one of the first and maybe most obvious reasons that Christians are deconstructing is because they realize that some or all of Christianity isn't true. And I'm not going to talk about any of the truth claims of Christianity in this video, but all I can say is that this was certainly the case for me, that when I started to study the history of Christianity, the history of doctrine, the history of the Bible, all of these things, I could start to see where these things came from. I could see, for example, that the Trinity was largely made up, wasn't really an original Christian idea, but was put back into Christianity at the two councils of Nicaea in the 4th century. And you start to look at these things and you think, wait, the people who taught me to believe in the Trinity, for example, didn't know this. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't know why they believed what they believed. They believed it because somebody had told them, and that person believed it because somebody else had told them. And frankly, that is how religion works. But when you have a generation of kids who have unlimited access to information, unlimited access to the world, who can actually ask these questions and get a bigger answer than just the people at their church or their pastor or minister, all of a sudden you have a recipe for kids who can see the flaws in faith. And what happens if you aren't giving people a new way to experience and relate to faith without it being a rigid set of beliefs or doctrines they have to hold, you are, quite frankly, creating the perfect conditions for kids to deconstruct. Because if you say take it or leave it and you give people a lot of things that are really historically flawed, don't be surprised if a lot of people leave it. The second reason why people are deconstructing, and frankly, I wish this was the reason I deconstructed, but it wasn't. But the second big reason is to do with the church's implicit power structure, control, and sort of toxic effects on people's lives. And I see this a lot with women. I was a man in an evangelical fundamentalist world. Being a man who can speak, who can do what I'm doing right now, who can, share the gospel, who can stand up on stage. Like, it's honestly a little bit like a drug. You get all the attention. You get a world that's built for you. This is a world that's built for straight men to dominate. And what happens if you're a woman in this world, you have to go through life realizing you're a second-class citizen. Your voice doesn't matter as much. For example, I was a youth pastor for a little while, and my wife did just as much work as I did, but I was the youth pastor. My name was on the paycheck at the end of the week, not hers, even though we worked together equally. In fact, I think a lot of people would have said she was just a helpmate to me and my ministry. She was just an asset to me and the work that I was called to do. This was my calling, and she was tagged along for the ride. And when you're in a system that exerts power over you, it can be normal to try to rationalize that system. There's even a famous Italian philosopher, Antonio Gramsci. I'm probably not saying it right, but he famously argued that people end up having a stake in the power structures that control them. So even though power structures are acting on us, and even though they're not even always acting in our best interests, people come to believe that they have a stake in those. And that's what you do see a lot of people in churches doing. Even though a church can be really toxic and masculine, male-led, patriarchal, some women find a way to belong to this and to uphold it. But for other women, and many of whom I know are now deconstructing, that's just not good enough. And all of a sudden you start to ask the questions like, why can't I have a voice? Why am I a second-class citizen? Why am I being blamed for, the sexual thoughts and actions of men? Why? All these things. And when you constantly get the answer that this is just the way the Bible says, this is just what it has to be. For most people who are disenfranchised in a power structure, you have the choice. You either submit or you leave. And a lot of people are leaving. This is true for LGBTQ people as well, because they have also been disenfranchised by this system. So I think even some men in some cases have been very disenfranchised by this system, especially if you don't have a certain set of gifts or a certain way of presenting or carrying yourself. This is a system that privileges or prioritizes a certain type of man. So a lot of the deconstructing that's happening is by people looking at this abuse of power and say, you're telling me that this system helps me love Jesus, and you're telling me this system is good for people, and you're telling me this system is God's natural design for the world, and yet you get the power in this system, and I, not me, but this person is saying, I am disenfranchised in this system. That can't be the way that God relates to the world. It can't be that an all-loving God came to the world just so that he could give you the right to have power over me and to tell me how to live my life. And this is frankly why I think a lot of people are deconstructing, because of this exact toxic power structure that many, many religious communities uphold. The third reason a lot of people are deconstructing is because of ridiculous views of the Bible. And I've spent so much time on this channel talking about the Bible, talking about how biblical inerrancy is nonsense. You do not need to believe the Bible is inerrant to be a Christian. It was invented in the 19th and 20th century. This is not something you need to believe. But if you are raised in a North American evangelical church, fundamentalist church, you could very easily, in many, many churches, you could very easily come to believe that if you don't believe the Bible, you can't be a Christian. And evangelicalism as a movement, and I've talked in other videos about how problematic the language is, but I'm going to keep using it because there's not really any other way to say this. But evangelicalism as a movement has created a world where they're constantly trying to justify these ridiculous, nonsensical beliefs about the Bible, that it's a science textbook and you have to listen to Ken Ham and go to the Creation Museum and believe that the world is 6,000 years old, that the Bible is our perfect answer for everything jurisprudential, that the Bible tells us how to live a moral life, even though the God of the Old Testament was a vicious asshole and killed a lot of people and commanded genocide again and again and again. So when you give this book to a generation of people who are extremely well educated and have access to all the information of the world at their fingertips and say, you have to ignore what your university science professors tell you because the Bible overrules that. Or you have to ignore anything to do with law because the Bible overrules that. Or you have to ignore the fact that women should be treated equal to men because the Bible overrules that. And that's not even to mention the whole world of nonsense apologetics that does so much extra work to try to prove that the Bible is infallible, when really the Bible is full of historical mistakes, inaccuracies. The Bible was created through a process of history that decided which books would be in and out. I've done another video where I talked about how one of the earliest Bibles that we have actually has different books in the New Testament. So knowing that evangelical fundamentalist beliefs of the Bible are fundamentally false, and really obviously false to anybody who's actually willing to look and be honest with themselves, and then expecting kids to keep lying to themselves, it's no wonder that kids leave because of this. And it's a shame because, as I've said, when you belong to a Christian tradition that's a lot bigger and doesn't have to believe that the Bible is inerrant to be a Christian, you could give these people a way to keep belonging to the tradition. But instead, what happens when people are being so brainwashed to believe that the only true way to practice Christianity is to believe in an infallible Bible, not a huge surprise that when they stop believing in the infallible Bible, the nonsense, they say, I have to leave. This isn't me anymore. I can't be a Christian anymore. There's a lot more to this one, and I'm not going to say any more about it right now, but it drives me up the wall. If you really look at the Bible and you see ancient Near Eastern myth and Greco-Roman narratives, and you mix these two together and you realize that that's exactly what the Bible is, and your church says to you, if you just look at it and see it for what it is, you can't be a Christian, not a big surprise, people are deconstructing. I think the fourth and final big reason why people are deconstructing is just exposure. It's fairly easy to have a very narrow view of the world when you, like me, I grew up in a town that we were mostly white and we were mostly Christians of some sort. And the enemy, the big scary enemy, was the Catholic Church across town. And some of the people I'd come from that church and, got saved out of the Catholic Church. And they spent all their time talking about why the Catholic Church was the, core of Babylon is what they would say. And we were the true elect of God. So then imagine being that kid and going out of your, maybe small town or a very at least small thinking environment that you grew up in, and going to college and being with people from all over the world who have all different beliefs, who have different religious traditions, different ethnic traditions. You can do one of two things. You can either stick your head in the sand and say, these people are all going to hell and I need to convert them all. And God help me, some people do that and it's terrible. Or you can say, maybe the world that I was given was a little smaller than I thought. And I think a lot of people in fundamentalist churches have just never had their worldview challenged that much. So, and everyone I've talked to will say they have, but I really don't think people have genuinely engaged with the richness and complexity that's out there in the real world. And once you make friends with somebody from another world and start to have your beliefs challenged and like, hey, this Muslim friend of mine prays a lot like I do, even though they have very different beliefs, but they still talk to God. Or this Jewish friend of mine knows the Bible better than me, or whatever. It's really hard to just keep your faith in that box. And I think that's kind of the fourth big reason why kids are deconstructing, because they are stepping into a world, both in reality and online, that is much bigger than anything they were given. And they are looking at people that they were told are wicked, evil people living in sin and realizing they're just people with different traditions. They come from different cultures. They speak different languages. They have the same wants, needs, cares, hopes, concerns that I have. And it's really hard to just keep looking at those people and saying like, these are the lost. I'm the one who got it right, even though I came from, this little tiny community in a patch of North America. And if you go through that and you come out being the same person, frankly, I kind of pity you. You should go through engagement with people who are different than you and come out at the very least seeing the world as a little bit bigger than when you went in. The more that I've traveled, the more that I've seen the world, the more that I've met different types of people, I actually just each and every one of those experiences pushed me to the belief that my little tribalistic way of viewing God that I was raised with from a tiny little group of people in a tiny little corner of Canada that believed that we were doing the truth and almost nobody else in the world was, that if I would still believe that today as a almost 40-year-old, it's pathetic. I can't imagine trying to climb back inside that box. And thankfully, I don't have to. My faith has grown, my experience of the world has grown, and I still get to belong to a faith tradition and not believe all that baggage. So as I wrap this up, I think it's important for me to kind of say, one of the things that I think is really too bad about deconstruction is that the Christian tradition is a huge, rich, diverse tradition. And a lot of people who deconstruct aren't necessarily trying to leave Christianity, but they're trying to leave evangelicalism. I think some of progressive Christianity has made a space for deconstructing people, but unfortunately, a lot of people who are deconstructing have been brainwashed with this idea that it's not Christian unless you believe in an inerrant Bible, unless you're tribalistic, unless all these things. And they think the only alternative is just to completely leave. And I, for one, as somebody still in the tradition, I think it's a shame because I think the tradition can be much bigger and much more life-giving. However, if you have been damaged or hurt and you just need to get out, I don't blame you for that either. And frankly, I don't really care where people end up. I don't care if you become an atheist. I don't care if you join another religion. But it's just kind of my 2 cents on like what deconstruction has meant for me. It's been partially for me coming back to Christianity, not as a list of things that I believe, but as a tradition that I do belong to as a human being, even though I don't think I have all the right answers, even though I know as a biblical scholar, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Bible cannot be the word of God. But this is still a tradition I belong to and I find meaning in, and I really like that. So I'd love to know in the comments below what it was if you have deconstructed or gone through a period of deconstructing, or even if you didn't call it that. I'd be curious to know what it was that sparked that transformation for you. I've shared a little bit about what it was for me in this video, but I've also talked in other videos too. Let me know if you think I got it right. I'd be curious to know, like, this isn't research based. This is just a lot of the people I'm talking to deconstructing and trying to get some observations. So feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong and that people are actually deconstructing for a different reason. I'd be curious to know about that. If you haven't already done so, take a minute and subscribe to the channel. I talk a little bit about deconstruction and modern Christianity, but I'm also using a lot of my training as a biblical scholar to talk about the Bible and the New Testament, early Christianity, which all became so much more interested after I deconstructed, because once it stopped being a magic book from God and became a fascinating historical record of the dealings of the church, I just got so much more out of it. It's so interesting. So I'd love it if you came along for the ride. Subscribe if you haven't. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.